General Hospital spoilers tease that the sun had barely reached its peak above Port Charles when an ordinary afternoon at the Metro Court pool spiraled into something far more sinister. For Michael, the day had begun with a rare moment of peace. He had taken Wiley out for a swim, hoping to create a memory that would wash away the lingering stress of custody battles and the chaos left behind by courtroom warfare. Wiley's laughter echoed off the tiles, carefree and innocent. A brief return to normalcy. But that fragile illusion was shattered in a heartbeat. As Wiley paddled toward the shallow end, his attention was drawn downward, first curiosity, then confusion. And finally a scream that tore through the air like glass. Michael turned just in time to see his son freeze at the pool's edge, eyes locked on something below the surface. At first, Michael assumed it was a toy or a shadow, but as he moved closer, the shape became clear. It was a body. Limbs slack. Face turned toward the bottom. Hair flowing eerily in the chlorine-tinged water. Lifeless. Submerged. Real. And the worst part, there was no mistaking the look on Wiley's face. This wasn't just a child frightened by something unusual. This was trauma. Unfiltered. Permanent. Willow, having just stepped out from the cabana after changing Amelia, was suddenly drawn by the chaos. She ran across the pavement barefoot, heart pounding in her chest, only to find Michael cradling Wiley, shielding him from the pool and holding his trembling frame tightly. But it was too late. The image had seared itself into Wiley's memory. Willow's eyes followed Michael's and widened in horror as she recognized that unmistakable silhouette at the bottom of the water, a figure that should never have been there. And worse, someone they might know. Her hands shook as she pulled Wiley from Michael's arms and clutched him to her chest, rocking him as if it could undo what he had seen. But it couldn't. Hotel staff screamed. Lifeguards rushed in. Guests fled the area as security tried to assess the situation. A frantic call was made to the authorities. But for Michael, time seemed to stretch. His thoughts raced. Who was in the pool? How did they end up there? And why here, in the middle of a luxury hotel, surrounded by families and children? This wasn't an accident, it couldn't be. Especially not after the threats that had recently hovered over their lives like smoke. The name Sidwell rose unbidden in his thoughts. The same man who had dared to challenge Sonny for control of Port Charles's underworld. The man who had already been suspected of orchestrating the bombing of Sonny's penthouse. Could this body be Sidwell's next twisted message? Could this be the beginning of something even darker? Michael could feel it, the city was unraveling. The violence they had worked so hard to shield their children from was finding ways to seep through every crack. Willow, equally shaken, began connecting the dots with him in frantic whispers. Could this be Natalia? Could it be someone they had tried to protect? Or someone who had known too much? And in the midst of this maelstrom was Wiley. A little boy who would never again see a swimming pool without remembering the moment horror rose up from the deep. His eyes, still wide and wet, darted between his parents, silently pleading for answers that neither could give. They hadn't just lost a sense of safety, they'd lost their ability to pretend. Michael's instinct screamed at him that the body wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. A declaration. A warning shot. He remembered Sonny's words about the coming war. About Sidwell's aggression. He remembered the fire at Charlie's pub, Christina's near-death experience, and now this. They were under siege. And the body in the pool proved it. This wasn't a game of territory or power. This was personal. As emergency responders finally arrived and began the process of extracting the body, the crowd grew. Reporters, onlookers. Police, all watching, speculating. And as the lifeless form broke the surface and the cloth covering the gurney settled, Michael gripped Willow's hand so tightly she winced. He didn't want to know who it was. He needed to. He had to be ready. Because whatever the identity, this meant escalation. This meant Wiley, and Amelia, were now growing up in a world where innocence was no longer an option. And it meant Michael had to choose whether to retreat, to try to protect his family from the shadows, or to step into the line of fire and finally face the truth. They were no longer bystanders. They were targets. As Willow stroked Wiley's hair and whispered soothing words he could barely process, Michael looked toward the sky, past the security tape and flashing red lights, toward the city that had become a battlefield in disguise. And he knew one thing: everything had changed. The war had reached their doorstep. And now, it was only a matter of time before more blood surfaced, perhaps not just in water, but in the streets of Port Charles. The discovery of a lifeless body at the bottom of the Metro Court pool sent a chilling wave through Port Charles, shattering the deceptive calm that had cloaked the city in the days following Daisy's interrupted baptism. It wasn't just any corpse, it was Natalia. And with that horrifying realization came a chain reaction of shock, suspicion, and deepening obsession that threatened to pull everyone involved into a vortex of suspicion and destruction. Michael had been walking poolside with Wiley, trying to help his son relax after the chaos of the past few days, but instead of solace, Wiley was traumatized by the sight of a body submerged beneath the water, still, hair drifting upward, eyes open in a silent scream. His cries echoed through the hotel as Michael dove in, dragging the cold, heavy corpse out, only to find the unmistakable features of Natalia, the woman Sonny had sent away for her own protection. What was she doing back in Port Charles, and why was she dead? Anna, already stretched thin by the escalating gang warfare and attempted bombing at Charlie's pub, was pulled into this latest disaster with grim determination. Natalia's death wasn't an accident. There were no signs of drowning consistent with natural causes. Instead, the bruises, the signs of restraint, the defensive wounds, everything pointed to foul play. Worse, forensic analysis began to suggest she had been dead for at least 2 days. Her body stored somewhere cold before being dumped into the pool. The method was meant to send a message. But from whom, and to whom? The implication that Sonny might have been involved was immediate. If only because of Natalia's history with him. Everyone knew he had promised to send her to Belize to keep her safe after she had interfered in the baptism and raised suspicions about the church. Sidwell, and his growing influence. Now, Natalia was gone, and people whispered that perhaps she had known too much. The fact that she died just days after trying to contact Marco and Lucas fueled speculation. What had she been trying to tell them? What information had she uncovered? And more importantly, who had wanted her silenced? Sonny's reaction was predictably violent. Upon learning of Natalia's death, he flew into a rage, at Sidwell, at the justice system, and even at Jason, who tried to calm him. Sonny insisted that Sidwell had orchestrated this, that the man was eliminating threats one by one and that Natalia had simply been the next on his list. But without evidence, Anna couldn't arrest Sidwell. And without control, Sonny was becoming dangerous. He made vague threats, swore vengeance, and began withdrawing from anyone who counseled patience, including Michael. But Michael was now walking a razor's edge himself. Guilt consumed him. Wiley hadn't slept since the discovery, waking up screaming, asking why the lady in the pool wouldn't open her eyes. Willow blamed herself for not insisting they leave town after the baptism. And Michael, who had refused to believe the rumors about Sonny's growing volatility, was beginning to wonder if his father had indeed taken matters into his own hands. Natalia had confided in him days before her death. She had been afraid. She had wanted to talk. And Michael had ignored her. Meanwhile, Anna's investigation uncovered something far more sinister than anyone expected. Surveillance footage from Metro Court showed a man in a black hoodie accessing the pool area at 3 a.m. the night before the discovery. His face was obscured, but his build was familiar. When traced through facial recognition software, the preliminary match came back not for Sidwell, but for Marco. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Corinthos family and devastated Lucas, who had just begun to reconnect with the man he once considered a friend. Why would Marco be there? Was he following Natalia's trail? Was he acting on Sidwell's orders, or worse, on Sonny's. As tensions escalated, PCPD launched a formal inquiry into Sonny's possible involvement. Search warrants were issued, properties combed. And Jason was briefly detained for refusing to disclose details of a phone call between him and Natalia 3 days before her death. Sonny, infuriated, saw this as a betrayal. His grip on reality, already slipping, fractured. He began posting guards around Christina's hospital room, even though her condition was improving. He sent Damien out of town. He began holding private meetings with men from his past, men who owed him favors, men who operated in the shadows. Everyone feared what might come next. But the greatest tragedy came not from what Sonny might do, but what had already been done. The autopsy report revealed that Natalia had been pregnant. No one had known. Not Lucas. Not Marco. And certainly not Sonny. The question of paternity loomed like a storm cloud, but the greater horror was this. Someone had murdered a pregnant woman and left her body like a message in one of the city's most public places. The implications were catastrophic. The rage in Anna's voice when she read the report aloud to Dante was barely restrained. This wasn't just murder, it was execution. And if they didn't act soon, Port Charles would drown in the consequences. Brooke Lynn, who had been on edge since the truth about Gio came out, now found herself entangled in yet another tragedy. She had seen Natalia at the Quartermain mansion just days prior, overheard her mentioning something about a second set of church documents, something that needed to be seen by the right people. Had she been referring to Daisy's baptism? Was Natalia planning to expose more than just Sidwell's grip on the justice system? Was there another secret hidden beneath the surface, waiting to explode? Meanwhile, Christina's condition was deteriorating. She had suffered more from smoke inhalation than initially believed, and despite best efforts, her oxygen levels remained unstable. Sonny had been pacing outside her ICU room like a caged animal, but when he finally stepped inside, she barely opened her eyes. The priest who had baptized Daisy stood beside her bed, whispering prayers, but Sonny ignored him. All he could see was his daughter, broken, fragile, and fading. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he had failed her. Whether he pulled the trigger or not, his war with Sidwell had claimed another victim. Maybe more than one. Alexis, hovering near collapse herself, turned on Sonny with a fury few had seen before. She blamed him for everything, for Natalia, for Christina, for the shadow that now hovered over the Corinthos name. She demanded he leave the hospital. He refused. He said nothing. Just stood there, staring at Christina, whispering promises that he could never keep. Back at the Metro Court, maintenance drained the pool for cleaning. As workers scrubbed the walls, they found something else wedged deep in the pool's filtration system, Natalia's phone. Still intact. Still locked. But with every indication that it might hold messages, photos, or even audio recordings of her final hours. Anna immediately took it into evidence. The race was on. Would the phone reveal Natalia's killer? Would it implicate Sidwell? Or someone even closer? In the days to come, Port Charles would descend into chaos. Christina's health would hang in the balance. Wiley's trauma would deepen. Michael's sense of failure would calcify into obsession. Willow would pull away. And Sonny, trapped between vengeance and guilt, would teeter on the brink of war. But the real question, the one no one dared ask, was simple and terrifying. If Natalia wasn't the last victim, then who would be next? What began as a quiet undercurrent of suspicion has now exploded into full-blown psychological warfare. As the sinister alliance between Marco and Sidwell tears through the heart of Port Charles with a calculated madness that refuses to be ignored. The city, long accustomed to chaos and betrayal, now finds itself unraveling under the weight of a threat that is neither loud nor obvious, but instead stealthy, manipulative, and disturbingly personal. From the moment the lifeless body of Natalia surfaced in the Metro Court pool, her death not just tragic but symbolic, the balance of power began to shift in a way no one saw coming. It was not merely a murder, it was a message, a calling card written in silence and submerged in water. Meant not only to terrorize but to awaken Sonny to the fact that his enemies no longer hide in shadows. They walk boldly into the light with smiles and masks and knives aimed at his heart. Marco, once seen as a quiet man with wounds from the past and hopes of redemption, is now revealed to be far more complex, a puppet whose strings are pulled by a puppeteer named Sidwell, who himself is obsessed with control, with power, and with dismantling the Corinthos legacy one soul at a time. This is not a battle waged with bullets and muscle, this is psychological warfare. And its first major casualty is not Natalia, but peace itself. Christina's near-death experience in the fire at Charlie's pub is no random act of violence. It is the second move in a strategy built on fear, confusion, and the complete dismantling of Sonny's emotional core. With Alexis on the verge of collapse and Sonny consumed with guilt and rage, the only thing holding the family together is fraying faster than anyone can repair. The horror is not just in what has happened but in what might still come. The fear in Wiley's eyes as he watched Natalia's body pulled from the pool is a haunting reminder that innocence is no longer safe in Port Charles. Michael's attempts to shield his son only amplify his own panic, while Willow, barely holding on after her own brush with loss and betrayal, can feel the seams of her family tearing under pressure. No one is untouched. Jason, long Sonny's silent warrior, now finds himself questioning not just the threat but the very structure of the life he has defended for so long. Every ally feels like a potential traitor. Every conversation is laced with the suspicion that the walls are listening, that Marco and Sidwell are always 3 steps ahead. Meanwhile, Anna and the PCPD, already spread thin, are facing the uncomfortable truth that this isn't just about crime, it's about control. About someone rewriting the rules of engagement in a way that leaves even seasoned investigators gasping for clarity. The evidence doesn't point to the usual suspects. It dances between legal loopholes, corrupted data, and a web of half-truths that leave the department chasing ghosts. And yet the pattern is clear, each act escalates the fear, isolates Sonny, and drives a wedge between him and those he loves most. Marco and Sidwell are not interested in money or titles. They want to break Sonny. They want to fracture Port Charles so deeply that the pieces can never be put back together. The psychological pressure is unrelenting. Every failure to protect, every missed sign, becomes a haunting refrain in Sonny's mind. He is a man built to control chaos, now trapped in a storm that refuses to be tamed. The death of Natalia is only the beginning. Sidwell made it personal because that is the only way to win. He doesn't just want Sonny gone, he wants Sonny to unravel, to watch everything he's built turn to ash. To see the faces of those he failed every time he closes his eyes. And Marco, with his deceptive calm and tragic backstory, is the perfect weapon. He walks through the city unnoticed, collecting weaknesses, observing vulnerabilities, planting seeds that Sidwell then nurtures into full-blown disaster. The city is slipping. Even those who once dismissed the threat are now shaken. Laura, long a voice of reason and balance, is rethinking her position after Sonny's warnings proved true. Valentine, with his own past in shadows, senses the sophistication of the enemy and fears what it means for everyone caught in the blast radius. The Quartermaines, normally insulated by legacy and wealth, are finding that this new brand of terror does not respect pedigree. With Christina's life hanging by a thread and Natalia's death triggering new levels of mourning and suspicion, the city's emotional infrastructure is collapsing. Each family is fracturing. Each ally is doubting. And through it all, Marco and Sidwell remain just out of reach, orchestrating their madness with precision. What they have unleashed is more than revenge, it is a reshaping of Port Charles into a city ruled not by loyalty or legacy, but by fear. And unless someone finds a way to stop them, the next corpse may not be discovered in a pool, but on the steps of Sonny's home, or worse, in his own bed. The clock is ticking. The pressure is mounting. And for the first time in years, Port Charles is truly defenseless, not because of a lack of strength, but because the enemy is no longer outside the gates, they're already inside. Wearing familiar faces, speaking kind words, and hiding the knives that will finish what they started. Under the mounting weight of Wiley's emotional unraveling, Michael begins to feel the suffocating presence of truths long buried now clawing their way to the surface, threatening to unravel not just his own carefully controlled life but the entire foundation of his family's legacy. The image of his son frozen in terror at the edge of the Metro Court pool, his small frame trembling as he stared into the glassy water where the lifeless body of Natalia lay submerged, has become an inescapable specter in Michael's mind. That single moment, that one image, has transformed from a traumatic incident into a catalyst for a chain reaction of suspicion, grief, and dread. Michael has always fought to protect Wiley from the corruption of the world around them, from the violence, the betrayals, and the sins of the Corinthos name, but in the wake of that horror, he begins to question whether he's already failed. Wiley's nightmares, his silence, the way he now hesitates before getting into any pool, all of it signals not just trauma but awareness, a deep, unspoken understanding that something evil has entered their lives and left its stain. And Michael knows exactly where to point the blame, at Sonny, his father, whose war with Sidwell has now reached such catastrophic proportions that innocent lives are being caught in the crossfire. Wiley's questions, innocent yet piercing, break Michael's composure in ways no courtroom ever could. Was she someone we knew? Why did someone put her there? Will they come for us too? Michael is no longer simply a father or a son, he is now a shield, constantly bracing for the next blow that might come from the shadows of a family legacy he cannot seem to escape. Every attempt to keep Wiley safe only leads to more lies, and with each lie comes the guilt that he may be becoming the very man he swore never to emulate. As the days pass and the investigation into Natalia's death deepens, Michael finds himself being dragged into a vortex of moral compromise and emotional reckoning. Anna's questions about Sonny grow sharper. Jason's silence becomes more troubling. And Willow, who once stood firmly by Michael's side, now looks at him with eyes full of quiet alarm, questioning not only his decisions but the darkness those decisions might invite into their lives. With Wiley's behavior growing more erratic, withdrawn at school, quiet at home, trembling at night, Michael is forced to acknowledge what he has long denied: the damage has already been done, and unless he takes control now, it will only get worse. That's when Michael makes the decision to confront Sonny directly, not just as a son to a father, but as a man to the architect of so much of Port Charles's unrest. What begins as a confrontation soon spirals into a declaration of war. Michael doesn't threaten Sonny with violence. He threatens him with something far more dangerous: exposure. If Sonny won't end the war with Sidwell, if he won't dismantle the criminal empire that continues to put children like Wiley in danger, then Michael will go public, with everything. Every bribe, every favor, every body buried beneath decades of blood-stained loyalty. The threat sends shockwaves through Sonny's network, and Jason is caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to his oldest friend and the growing desperation in Michael's voice as he pleads not for revenge, but for peace. But Michael doesn't stop there. He starts gathering evidence. He talks to Anna, subtly at first, but then more openly. He revisits old connections at the DA's office. He reaches out to Valentine, who has his own reasons for wanting Sonny brought down. And as he digs, Michael discovers something far worse than he expected: evidence that Natalia's death may not have been merely collateral damage but part of a larger, orchestrated strategy designed to provoke Sonny into making a fatal mistake. The more Michael uncovers, the more he realizes that this isn't just about Sidwell or Sonny, it's about a new power rising in Port Charles, one that thrives on disorder and psychological terror. And Wiley, innocent, frightened, watching everything with wide, knowing eyes, becomes the quiet center of this gathering storm. His trauma is not just personal, it's prophetic. Michael sees it now. Unless someone stops the madness, Wiley's future will be nothing more than a repetition of the past, a life spent cleaning up the blood of fathers who could never stop fighting. So Michael makes his choice. He won't be silent. He won't be complicit. If it means tearing down Sonny, so be it. If it means confronting Jason, so be it. If it means severing every last tie to the Corinthos name to save his son, then that's the war Michael is willing to fight. Because when children are traumatized by corpses in pools, when mothers vanish without answers, and when fathers choose war over family, the time for compromise is over. The ghosts have returned to Port Charles, and Michael Corinthos is no longer willing to let them haunt another generation.